All right, so today, very happy to have with us the experts from Sherman Studio. I'm going to introduce them in just a moment. But first, I'd like to share a little bit about Success Story Studio. We have two studios in the studio today. So Success Story Studio is a boutique marketing agency devoted to one thing, producing concise, impactful case studies as a turnkey productized service. Our mission is to help small businesses and professional services firms like financial advisors and planners, accountants, and attorneys, as well as other types of businesses, turn their client success stories into powerful new business attraction tools. Think of it as turbocharged testimonial marketing. This webinar series we just started a few months ago, and this regular educational webinar series is designed to offer content marketing tips, tricks, and best practices to small business owners and professionals, right from the mouths of the experts who are doing that every day. And we're very pleased to have with us Sherman Studio, the design experts. Sherman Studio describes themselves as a small but mighty design studio specializing in clean, intentional, and impactful creative solutions. Founded by creative director Julie Sherman and based in Newton, Massachusetts, the studio engages with clients on projects ranging from complex rebrands to simple campaigns. And in their words, we live to make meaningful brands and ideas more beautiful, understandable, and impactful. We're especially honored when we get to be part of something that's philosophically bigger than us. We love doing good work for clients who are doing good. And I absolutely love that idea. And today we have with us Abby Mullion, design manager at Sherman Studio, and her colleague PB Dubois, a designer at the studio. We also have with us founder and creative director Julie Sherman, who will be available to answer your questions.
Thanks for that intro, Ted. We're really excited to be here today. Hi, everyone. Like I said, my name is Abby. And before we jump in, I wanted to share something that I was thinking about this morning that a mentor of mine told me one time. She said that the best designs are like good friends. They make life easier and bring joy. Now, I'm a sucker for cheesy stuff like that, so this one stuck with me over the years. So today, let's think about how our designs can become our good friends. We'll share our ideas, and hopefully leave you with fresh inspiration to make your designs more user-friendly and delightful. Fun. Let's make some new BFFs together. This is going to be part lecture, part conversation, and we're here for it all. So, are we ready for some Design 101? Get your pencils ready because we've got a lot of good tips coming your way. And we promise we aren't trying to turn any of you guys into senior designers in one day, but we truly do aim to add to your design toolbox today so that it's less stressful when you have anything design related to do. So to start, I'd love to get a sense of who's in the room. Do any of these roles sound like you? Let us know in the chat if you're an A, not directly design connected, but you care. Maybe you're the founder and president of your business. You care about design because you want to make sure your brand reflects who you are and who you want to be. Are you a B? You manage people doing design. Perhaps you're the head of your department and you're not directly involved in design, but you work closely with those who are and you want to give better feedback. Or are you C? You're apparently designing without any training. Maybe you wear a lot of hats and the design hat landed on your head and you have big goals and a lean budget. So you're designing, but with no training and very little time. Let's see, who have we got here? Cares, has no clue. Totally great. Okay, we've got a C. Great, cool, thanks. Okay, and one more question for y'all. Ooh. Yeah, PB was a C too. I was too, and I'm sure many others. One more question. How many of you have brand guidelines? Are you an A, you've got them and you find them useful? A B, you think you might have them, but you don't really know how to use them? Or are you a C? You have no clue what I'm talking about, which is totally fine. Okay, we've got an A. A, awesome. That's great to see. Good, good, good. Okay, well, good news. We create brand guidelines over here. And no matter if you have them or if you don't, we're pretty sure we could help you. So first, a little bit about us. As Ted mentioned, we're a 7-woman strong design studio located just outside of Boston. We're almost 17 years old and we have a lot of collective expertise. And almost all of us have played other roles in business before becoming designers, so we completely understand what it's like to make design decisions without training. So we know you all are super, super busy. So let's give you a few magic tricks to give you a boost. So we've got 13 design DIY tips for you today, and there's nothing unlucky about this number 13. We're going to keep this quick and high level, and we could probably write a chapter on each of these tips, but today we'll do the Cliff Notes version. And we'll be sure to pause a few times as we chat through our tips to take questions. So please ask away in the chat and we'll be sure to answer them when the time comes. So first off, why do we even care about you being better designers? It's not what you were trained to do. It's not what your clients are asking you to do. It's not how you succeed. Or maybe it is tied to success. Whether or not we realize it, design is essential in the world and for all businesses. And we know this because we've all experienced good design, right? The type that makes you remember a brand or gets you to click or want to learn more or invest in your services. And then unfortunately, we've also experienced bad design, the type that leads you to look elsewhere, leave a website quickly because it's hard to navigate, or even gloss over information that's too hard to digest. And we know that design is essential because there's actually a lot of research and data that backs up why visuals are so effective. So yes, design matters. And let's also remind ourselves that how we do the work matters too. What we mean by this is considering the choices you make and recognizing that your impact, both in how things look, but also how things are done, really matters. We have a lot to say in this area and want to help guide you to make thoughtful choices. So we'll be sprinkling some considerations throughout our presentation, but also feel free to follow up and we can go deeper in the Q&A. Okay, enough preamble. Let's get back to our 13 tips. So 13 might feel like a lot, but don't worry, they really fit into 3 basic categories. And to cover these categories for all your design work, we recommend that you ask yourself 3 questions. 1, am I using basic design rules? 2, do my designs look good? And 3, how effective is this? So let's get into it, starting with the design fundamentals. Am I using basic design rules? PB, my amazing colleague and design rock star, will walk us through some of the basics.
Hi, y'all. I'm PB, and I'm happy to start with some fundamental tips. Okay, so tip number 1, simplicity is key. You might feel inclined to include everything but the kitchen sink, but that's just not going to be effective because less truly is more. Keep your designs clean and uncluttered. Avoid overwhelming your audience with too much text or too many graphics, like what's on the left. And whenever possible, use simple, plain speak and avoid jargon. I like to think of communicating with my 3rd grader, and I ask myself, will the words make sense to her? Do the images help? Or what could be distracting? And asking myself those questions usually leads to simplifying things. Okay, on to number 2. You know how you feel after you've slept in a funny position and you wake up and you're all crooked and out of whack? Well, design can be exactly like that. So let's get everything straightened out. Tip number 2 is balance and align. Everything feels harmonious when in alignment. And this applies to life as much as it does to design, because I'm all about alignment and harmony. So pay attention to balance and alignment of text, color, and graphic elements. And we find balance in what's on the right versus what's on the left. And all programs now, not just Adobe, have amazing alignment tools. Look for them and use them. These program screenshots are just from Google Slides, Canva, and PowerPoint, all programs you might and probably use. Also, all programs now have distribute and snap to features. Seriously, there are so many built-in elements right now, it's almost harder to not align your design. And balance and alignment are not only about arranging objects. You can also think about how you can bring other elements into harmony. So take photography, for example, how you can make a variety of different images feel cohesive. So you can try using filters or cropping in a consistent way. There's so many easy available filters at our fingertips now. This example actually just uses Canva. Okay, on to the next point. My favorite one, use visual hierarchy. If everything is bold, nothing is bold. In my house, if everyone is yelling, like this morning, then no one can hear anything. So remember that everyone scans now and few people actually have the time to read. And visual hierarchy is just a fancy term for emphasizing what's most important. In other words, make the most important thing the biggest, the largest, the boldest, and everything else can be smaller and lighter. And here's a real life studio example. Visual hierarchy is something we focus on all the time here at the studio, and it makes a really big difference. And now on to our final design fundamental tip, clear space. Clear space matters. Who knew that nothing can sometimes be everything? Which sounds totally philosophical, we know, but it's true. You got to let your logo breathe. Don't feel like you have to fill every square inch of the design. Empty space can be your friend. And looping back into the brand guidelines, for any of you with brand guidelines, this is what all these little funny markings mean. Logo designs usually have carefully considered rules about clear space. Our best practice is to identify an element within the logo that becomes the standard unit of spacing. And that way, when the logo grows, so does the required space around it. And don't forget, clear space goes beyond just giving logos their breathing room. Use clear space for great effect in your layouts. So it truly is your secret weapon. Okay, Abby, should we recap?
Yes, thanks, PB. Let's see, a very quick recap before we move into visual aesthetics. Remember to keep it simple. Balance and alignment are your friends. If everything is bold, nothing is bold. Use visual hierarchy and let things breathe. Clear space matters. Before we jump into our next section, does anyone have any questions about any of these tips? We'll be checking the chat, and then feel free to unmute yourself too and ask anything live.
Yeah, I have a question. I was intrigued by the whole balance and alignment conversation that you were sharing, PB. When, obviously, I'm very focused on the word aspect, wordsmithing aspect of marketing. So what tips do you have in terms of balancing and aligning, your verbal written elements and your images in terms of font size, font placement? Is there, are there places where the eyes will naturally be drawn to in terms of, looking at a page and, how to follow a narrative story in line with the images on the page as well? Any tips you could give in that area?
I think it's great. So PB, I'll let you go in 1 second. The first thing that comes to mind to me is to make sure, this is almost like one of our later tips. But the first thing that comes to mind to me is to make sure that your messages and your images are connected to each other, that they are not just chosen randomly, but that you have an image that supports your message, and probably vice versa. And then I really think about the hierarchy tip and think about like what you want the eye to see first. Usually it's the headline is my guess, and then everything else supports it. I'm really curious what PB.
No, I definitely agree. I would also say left alignment, especially if we're talking a lot of text all in a line or all in a row. And then after your headline, the number 2 thing your audience should, their eyes should go to is usually the CTA, like their call to action. What do you want them to do? So yeah, it really, again, the visual hierarchy, huge.
Excellent. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
Don't see
If
anything.
not, we'll have, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't see anything in the chat. So unless anybody has any questions, want to raise their hands, I think we can move on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and we'll have a couple other questions, Q&A sessions too anyway. Okay, so now on to the next question that you want to ask yourself. Do my designs look good? Let's talk visual aesthetics. Aesthetics is really just a fancy term that means beauty, and we are aiming for a pleasing appearance or effect. And this doesn't just mean making everything decorative. Many aesthetics also aid functionality and accessibility. So with that, tip number 5 is adjust contrast for clarity. High contrast is absolutely essential for accessibility. So let's take a look at an example. So the text block on the left definitely hurts my eyes. It literally makes me squint. Ample contrast, like what you see on the right, enhances readability and reduces eye fatigue, so no squinting needed. So you might be asking yourself, how do we test for contrast? Well, we've got 2 ways, and the first one is kind of more high tech. So use an online color contrast checker. We here at the studio tend to use coolers.co, but there's a ton of free options online. Just Google color contrast checker and a bunch should show up. Or you could go low tech and use your good old printer. Print your piece in grayscale, no color toner required. And if your text and background color are too similar, then you got to up that contrast. So as an example, we printed that previous slides and we could hardly see anything on the left, so you could tell right away. And while we are on the topic of color, tip number 6 is color with care. The easiest hack for brand consistency is being deliberate with your use of color. So if you're going to do just one single thing to tighten up your visual brand, this is it. Get strategic about your colors. So how do we do this? We stick to a limited color palette to maintain visual coherence and avoid overwhelming your audience. You want to be sure to choose colors that complement each other and reflect the tone and personality of your brand or message. And analogous colors might be your secret weapon. So now you might be asking yourself, what are analogous colors? Analogous colors are colors that sit next to each other in the color wheel, as you can see on this slide. So picture like a beautiful sunset. You can't go wrong with a sunset, right? They're made up of reds, oranges, and yellows, and those colors blend smoothly into one another, creating a really pleasing and coordinated look. So the next time you're deciding on colors, think about sunsets and honestly anything in nature. Nature has a real knack for putting together gorgeous color combinations, so use that as inspiration. Another color usage consideration, one of my favorite topics, color psychology. So remember that colors affect our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. For example, red can make things feel urgent. Blue imparts calm and trust. Green tends to feel fresh and healthy. Yellow is optimistic and happy. Purple can feel luxurious, and white feels crisp and clean. But know that there's no hard or fast rules to any of this. It's always good to do a bit of research and consider what meaning might be associated with the colors you choose. Okay, and our 7th tip is to show and tell. Convey your message in a variety of ways to grab attention. So remember, we all take in information in different ways, and using pictures connects in ways that words can't do by themselves. So images can convey emotion, atmosphere, time, or place, which really enhances understanding and increases engagement. So there's a reason why they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And remember that it's fine and actually even a good thing to be a little bit redundant so that your message is as easy as possible to digest in a short period of time. So here on the slide is another example of communicating information in more than one way using data visualization. So on the right, icons were added, giving folks another way to take in the information. And then the key point of the chart is stated outright to drive the message home even more quickly. Okay, on to tip number 8, our final tip in this category, which is prioritize legibility. This is a big one. So with the abundance of free fonts comes great responsibility. And yes, there are a lot of fonts at our fingertips now, and we all like to pick on poor Comic Sans around here, but at least Comic Sans is highly legible. Our number 1 tip is to avoid overuse of decorative fonts like script, unless it's for something like a wedding invitation. So what we do recommend is selecting easy to read fonts for your text, especially for your body copy. Some tried and true examples are listed on the left, and you can see how all of them have well-defined characters and consistent spacing between the letters. And then also try to avoid overly stylized fonts like the ones that you see on the right, which are difficult to read. And then especially in longer form, they're even more difficult. Another tip for you guys is to limit all caps and italics usage. All caps feels like yelling. I don't know if you've ever seen an email come in from, I don't know, maybe your mom or something, and it's in all caps and it feels like they're yelling at you. And italics is just hard to read in longer form. Next tip, let's talk about line length and line spacing. It can be hard to read text when the line lengths are too long or too short, and also when the space between each line of text is either too spacious or too cramped. So I like to think of this like Goldilocks and the 3 bears, trying to find the settings that are just right. And lucky for us, there are studies out there that prove that the optimal number of characters for each line is between 50 and 70, which allows the eye to comfortably return back to the beginning of the next line without too much strain on the eyes. So check your character counts and then adjust your margins and also your column widths as needed. And then for line spacing, instead of single space, that's typically the default, or the double space that we were told to use for reports in high school, we recommend something kind of in between. So about 1.25 to 1.5 spacing usually works really nicely. Okay, so those are all our aesthetic tips. Let's do a recap. We learned that contrast is critical, color should be deliberate, visuals should be used to show and tell, and make sure everything is legible. Anybody have any questions about these tips?
Yeah, I've got a question if I may.
Yes.
So I know that I design as well, and I know that a lot of this stuff it is kind of taught and kind of stays similar. But I was just curious how trends affect what you guys do. Um, like when it comes to me, a trend will be something where I sort of, if it's something that really sticks and makes sense design wise, it tends to like continue in the work that I do. Like this sort of boldness. I feel like years ago that all this boldness wasn't necessarily something that was a necessity, but obviously with people's focus going down the drain and stuff like that, I think it's so much more important now to have kind of that boldness there. So I was just wondering how you guys treat that in your organization and how you kind of sift through the mass amount of trends that pop up in design.
It's such a good question. I have some thoughts. First, I'll say that we are probably like the dorkiest, least trendy studio that you'll ever meet. And there's actually a reason for it. It's not that we don't get excited for trends, which we do, but I think that the focus should always really be on what's going to meet the client goals and what's going to help the client stand out and differentiate. So especially with trends, we find that depends on what industry you're talking about, but sometimes it's actually really good to avoid them or follow a trend that's like really active in a completely different industry, just so you don't end up in a sea of sameness. So like some of the trends that we're seeing right now, they either don't feel appropriate for our clients, or we see like overused to the point that it's like, how many more gradients can you possibly fit in one piece? But at the same time, I think that if we find a trend that feels really on point with a client that meshes with their message and their personality, like we will totally go for it. But trends also muck with, and I don't know if you found this, trends can totally muck with legibility and accessibility. And that's something that we're also usually really kind of critical and cautious about. Noah, did that answer your question, or did I just go on some weird?
No, that was awesome.
Diatribe?
That was great. Yeah, I kind of figured you were going to say something along that route, because I feel like especially for what you guys do, it's really important to have a super strong design identity beforehand. So I assumed you wouldn't necessarily, it would be hurtful to stray too far away from, if you already got it good, there's no reason to change when something's not going to last. So that was great. That was awesome.
I would also add that if, you are, dipping your toes and testing out a trend, maybe you test it for a small campaign, right? Maybe you test it for a single event versus your annual report, something that can come and go and it'll be okay. Because right now kind of working on something that does have a lot of like noisy gradients. And even though that might not match the brand exactly, we're still following all the other rules of alignment and visual hierarchy and contrast checking and all of those things, but we're adding in that little bit of a trendy, cool, new flashy thing. So that would be my 2 cents.
Shelf life is that's a really good point.
Right. I have a real nitty-gritty question getting back to the legibility of fonts. So serif or no serifs? What do you guys prefer?
We do not need to have them like battle or defeat each other. There is a place for both of them in the world. Right. For sure. And I think honestly, it goes back to legibility and what you're trying to do. But there's enough space.
And so for the audience, serifs are those kind of little hanging chads that are off of a lot of classic font styles. But yeah, I definitely hear that it could in certain cases reduce legibility.
There's a lot of really cool research on all of it. I think that we tend to pore over it. I think overall it's more about the letter forms and the spacing than if it has a serif or doesn't have a serif. One thing that's very, I don't know, maybe it's like trending down, but like super condensed fonts, those can be sans serif and those can also be impossible to read.
Great, thank you.
We could get nerdy about fonts all day.
Definitely. Thanks.
Should we move into practical considerations or?
Yeah, that's me. All right. Okay, on to the next section, last section. Let's make sure we are truly working smart. And section 3 is all about those practical considerations. You and your audience both have a limited amount of time. So tip number 9, keep it relevant. Align your design with your goals and your audience's values and needs. So in other words, before you design anything, figure out what the point is. For any project, take a few minutes to center in on your goals to make sure that all of your decisions align. Ask the basics, what, why, and who questions. And in our world, we refer to this as our creative strategy. So this is where we write a not so brief creative brief that explains your why, among other things. But no need to create something super complex. You could even just jot down a few bullet points before you start your project and refer back to them to make sure you stay on track and everything's on the right path. Okay, tip 10, use templates. As the saying goes, work smarter, not harder. Templates can save you time and effort, which really streamlines the whole design process. And we're really impressed with the amount of excellent templates out there right now. Think of it as your solid framework, and then you can add in all the finishing touches to make it your own. There's so many good ones, both paid and free, that can give you such a boost. So when choosing your templates, we have 2 tips. Opt for classic ones, and then bring in the flair with your customization. And tip 2, check licenses. Make sure you are allowed to use the template the way you wish. And one giant caveat is to avoid the overused templates. We see this happen a lot around events and holidays. I remember one year for Giving Tuesday, we counted more than a dozen variations of the same Canva template being used by different organizations. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. So speaking of blending in, tip 11, stand out. Make sure you don't look the same as everyone else. One of our favorite quotes around the studio is, when the world zigs, zag. So always remember to find your zag. You can scan the landscape to see what everyone else is doing and then differentiate. So keep this in mind when working with stock visuals, for example. It's a relief to see unexpected imagery. Why is this lady so happy, right? I'm already paying attention to her. And yes, we get that you may be global, but there we go. But we've lost interest. But actually, what's that fruit all about? So we know there's a lot of pressure in standing out. And here are just a few other tips. Keep a scrapbook. Keep a bank of cool ideas handy. You can do this in PowerPoint, Google Slides, or Pinterest, or in just a simple notebook. And go outside your space. Look to other industries for inspiration. If you're only looking within your own industry, you'll likely see more of the same. And get a boost. It's not cheating to use AI. We love using AI for idea generation. We play with search queries, and it helps stimulate loads of good ideas, which we are then able to go and riff off of and create our own original materials. And remember, you don't have to stand out in every single way. You don't need the 37 pieces of flair. Sorry, Office Space reference. Can't help myself. You just need the one distinct visual to differentiate yourself and to be memorable. Okay, 2 more tips. Our next piece of advice is to seek feedback, which can be scary, especially if you're just starting out in design, but remaining curious and vulnerable is the only way you'll grow and learn. So don't hesitate to seek feedback on your design from colleagues, friends, or family members. And fresh eyes can really provide valuable insights and help you identify areas for improvement. So tips for getting better design feedback: don't just ask them if they like it. That's a yes/no question. It doesn't give them enough context to be useful. Give them context by asking specific questions where you can learn from their feedback. Some good questions to ask would be, what's your initial reaction? What do you find most appealing or least appealing? And how do you think this will land with my target audience? How will they react? This is one of my favorites. What am I missing? Is anything confusing or distracting? And lastly, while seeking feedback, try to check your ego at the door. And also realize that all design is subjective and you don't have to adjust for every single comment that comes your way. Okay, we made it. Number 13, know your limits. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I remember, and going along those lines, just because you have scissors doesn't mean you should cut your own hair. Been there, done that. So when thinking about your limits and before starting a project, I recommend asking yourself a few questions. What's the short-term and long-term return on investment here? For example, if it's a large fundraising piece, maybe you should invest in a designer. And how long is this project shelf life? Is this piece that will be around for 2 months or 2 years? 2 years may warrant a designer. And what level of complexity is required? Should you be building a website by yourself? Maybe not, but you could totally tackle some Canva social posts. And am I stuck? Do I need a fresh perspective? Sometimes we are so deep in, we can't see the forest for the trees, and you may need outside assistance. So if any project is going to be pushing your limits, maybe it's time to reach out for help. Okay, so play to your strengths, like the superhero you are, and we recommend focusing on design elements and tools that you're proficient with. And then seeking expert help, evaluating when a project goes beyond your current capabilities. But remember that learning is key. Think of gaps in your skills as opportunities for growth. And your time is limited. Consider if DIY is actually free or if it steals time away from the millions of other things on your list. Okay, Abby, did we do it?
Yes, we did. We made it. Final recap of the day. Make sure everything you do has meaning and is relevant. Use templates. Absolutely no shame in that. Be sure to stand out. Seek feedback and know that you don't have to respond to every comment. And know your own limits and be smart about your skills and your time. So following our 3 main principles, you really did do it. Congratulations. You followed the basics, your designs look great, and you were smart about all of it. So here's a final refresher of our 13 DIY tips. And just remember, like everyone here at the studio even, every expert was once a beginner and your design journey has only just begun. And quick side note, this presentation was made in Google Slides, which goes to show you, you don't need any fancy or expensive software to do amazing things. And finally, before we jump into our last Q&A, I wanted to thank everybody for being here today. We really had fun and we hope you did too. If you want to keep getting more tips and tricks from the studio, feel free to sign up for our newsletter. You could use the QR code right there on the screen. And then when you sign up, we'll send you our free design planning checklist. And that is it. Does anyone have any final questions for us?
Well, thank you, Abby and PB. That was awesome. And I do have a few questions, although you guys were answering a few of them as I was thinking of them as we went along. So you anticipated a lot of what I was thinking of. But this was fantastic. I love your tips. I know these will be really valuable for our audience. So as Abby said, if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I have a couple myself. So 13 tips is a lot, and it's a lot to absorb. So what are kind of 3 of the top mistakes that you see novice designers or non-designers making in their own design with their firms? What would be the the worst case scenarios you see out there?
Too much information. Overwhelming the audience with too much, because then you start getting into you lose the visual hierarchy, you lose your margins, you lose your spacing, you lose your clear space, and it becomes muddled. So keep things top level.
Yeah, I've definitely been there.
Yeah, that's a good one. And kind of like piggybacking off of that, tiny margins. Like I've seen pieces where the margins are so tiny and the text kind of goes almost edge to edge. And that just becomes really hard to read. It gives the eye no rest. And so make those margins nice and fat, and then your eye can kind of like really soak in the information more.
Excellent. Another kind of broader
Can
question.
I add one more?
Oh, please. Sorry, Julie. Yeah.
Logo abuse, consistent use of logo, crowding logo, stretching logo, recoloring logo. It's definitely one of those things that I think that if there is one thing to get right, it's like a respectful usage of the logo. It will like polish everything up. No rainbow logos. Okay, sorry.
No, that's good. And that actually leads kind of into my next question, which is around brand and visual design and how that relates to brand. And I know we talked about logos, and you gave some really great tips up front in terms of alignment of logos and how to use them. But and this could be a topic for another webinar or next one, but how important is the visual design, the visual elements to a brand, an organization's brand, and how does that fit in with other elements of that brand?
Abby, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I could start. So first off, let's start with like some definitions. So a brand is kind of like your business's personality, their tone of voice, what people are saying about you when you're not in the room. And then versus, the visual elements or identity or design aspect of it is like the visual representation of that brand. And so your brand should really inform your visual identity. And then your visual identity should really support all aspects of your brand. So if your brand is like friendly, cheerful, warm, then your colors should exude that. Your logo should exude that. The font choices that you make shouldn't be like, I don't know, like cold or anything. They should be like warm and friendly. And so just making sure that all those like adjectives that you use to describe your brand also are, you could feel that when you see any visuals.
I love that.
That's great. Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, you guys, walk the talk as well, because, just getting to know your brand a little bit, I know it's fun, it's fun, but also professional, it's colorful, it's bright, it's very super positive, which is all part of your individual and collective personalities, and that comes through in the visual elements of your brand as well. So I agree that that consistency is so incredibly important, and authenticity as well.
That means a lot. Thank you.
So coming from the perspective of a writer, I'm very interested in how good design can elevate written content, like, the stuff that we write, case studies, or longer form content like ebooks and white papers and things of that nature. What are the best ways to utilize design elements in those types of content assets?
Use them, because it will get your writing, it will help your writing be elevated and read and instill like trust and credibility. I think design, doesn't answer the question about images, but design can surely package and more effectively communicate any and all writing. And I'll let my team chime in if they want to say anything about how images can support writing.
Well, it all goes hand in hand. And like we talked about a little bit earlier, but people take in information in different ways. So offering, a photo along with a big amount of text, it can be so complimentary, and people will, it's just memorable and something that people can identify with.
Yeah, and I love what you guys said earlier about using white space or clear space to really, kind of open up that messaging, both from the visual element, the imaging, and the written word as well. So yeah, it does all flow together. Great. Well, I think unless we have any other questions, I don't see anything else in the chat. I think we're right about at time, and we can wrap up. Abby, did you want to share again how people can reach you guys, best way to follow you?
Yeah. So our website is jshermanstudio.com, and then we're on all the socials. We're on Instagram. I think every handle is at jshermanstudio. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook. So you could find us pretty much anywhere.
Awesome.
And we're all also on LinkedIn, like personally. So feel free to connect with us.
For us here at Success Story Studio, also, you could reach us at ted@successstorystudio.com via email, or our website, successstorystudio.com, or you can follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, all under @Success Story Studio. So with that, thank you so much, Julie, PB, and Abby. You guys were fantastic, and really enjoyed having you on. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
for having us.
This was fun.
It was a lot of fun. All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Have a good
You
one.
too.